Welcome to the Royal Road School of Carmelite Prayer. A link to the Praying with Teresa of Avila website has been provided below to enable you to find the catalog of offerings on this channel and the notes of today's presentation. The First Dwelling Places, Chapter 2, Interior Castle, by Saint Teresa of Avila. Treats of how ugly a soul is when in mortal sin, and how God wanted to let a certain person know something about this. Discusses also some matters on the theme of self-knowledge. This chapter is beneficial, for there are noteworthy points. Explains what is meant by these dwelling places. You should consider what it would mean to this so brilliantly shining and beautiful castle to fall into mortal sin. There is no darker darkness. The very sun that gave the soul so much brilliance is still in the center. The soul is as though it were not there to share in these things, yet it is as capable of enjoying His majesty as is crystal capable of reflecting the sun's brilliance. Nothing helps a soul. Nothing helps such a soul. All the good works it might do while in mortal sin are fruitless. Separated from Him, they cannot be pleasing in His sight. After all, the intention of anyone who commits a mortal sin is to please the devil, who in darkness itself the poor soul becomes darkness itself. The Lord wanted to show someone the state of a soul in mortal sin. If it were understood, it would be impossible to sin, even though having to undergo great trials to flee the occasions. May He give you, daughters, the desire to beseech Him for those in this state. For just as all the streams that flow from a crystal clear font are also clear, the works of a soul in grace are most pleasing in the eyes of both God and man. Thus, in the case of a soul who through its own fault withdraws from this font and plants itself where the water is black and foul-smelling, everything that flows from it is wretched and filthy. Keep in mind that the font, the shining sun in the center of the soul, does not lose its beauty. It is always present in the soul. But if a black cloth is placed over a crystal in the sun's brilliance will have no effect on the crystal, though the sun is shining on it. How is it possible that realizing this, you don't strive to remove the pitch from this crystal? Oh Jesus, how sad to see a soul separated from this light. How disturbed the senses are, in other words, the people who live in these rooms. How miserable is the state of those rooms within the castle. And in the faculties, the will, the intellect, and the memory of the soul, what blindness, what bad management. In some, since the tree is planted where the devil is, what fruit can it bear? I once heard a spiritual man who was not surprised at the things done by a person in mortal sin, but at what was not done. There is nothing that deserves the name evil except mortal sin, which carries everlasting evils in its wake. This, daughter, we must be in fear of and ask God to protect us against it. For if He doesn't guard the city, our labor will be in vain. The Lord granted the person, Teresa, mentioned 2 blessings. The first was an intense fear of offending Him. The second, a mirror for humility in which she saw that none of our good deeds had its source in ourselves, but rather from the font in which the tree, symbolizing our souls, is planted. And from this sun, it gives warmth to our works. And without this help, we can do nothing. The time spent reading this would be lost if we were left with these two blessings. May it please His goodness to give us the grace to profit by them. These interior matters are so obscure for our minds that anyone would be forced to say foolish things in order to say something right. Whoever reads this must have patience, for I have to write about what I don't know. Sometimes I don't know what to say or how to begin. It's important for you that I explain some things about the interior life. We always hear what a good thing prayer is, yet only what we do in prayer is explained to us. Little is explained about what the Lord does in a soul. I mean about the supernatural. When speaking about this heavenly interior building and considering it in many ways, we shall find great comfort. It is so little understood by mortals. The Lord, however, has given me some understanding, especially about certain more difficult things. But before discussing them, I will have to repeat well-known matters. So let's get back to our castle with its many dwelling places. You mustn't think of them as following one in file after the other, but turn your eyes towards the center, which is the royal chamber where the king stays. Surrounding this center room are many other rooms. The things of the soul must always be considered as spacious and large. The sun in the royal chamber shines in all parts. It is very important for any soul that practices prayer not to stay in one corner. Let it walk through these dwelling places, above, below, and to the sides, since God has given it such dignity. Don't force it to stay a long time alone in any one room. Oh, but if it is in the room of self-knowledge, how necessary this room is, for never is anything else fitting for it. For humility is always at work like bees making honey. Without it, everything goes wrong. Remember that the bee flies about gathering nectar from the flowers. So it is with the soul in the room of self-knowledge. Let it fly sometimes to ponder the majesty of God. Here it will discover its lowliness and be free from the vermin that enter the first rooms, those of self-knowledge. It is only by God's mercy that a person practices self-knowledge. And believe me, we shall practice much better virtue through God's help than by being tied down to our own misery. Knowing ourselves is so important. While we are on this earth, nothing is more important than humility. So it is good, indeed, very good, to try to enter first into the room where self-knowledge is dealt with. That is the right road. In my opinion, we shall never completely know ourselves if we don't strive to know God. By gazing at His grandeur, we get in touch with our own lowliness. And by looking at His purity, we shall see our own filth. By pondering His humility, we shall see how far we are from being humble. Two advantages come from such activity. First, something white seems whiter next to something black. The second is that our intellect and will become better prepared for every good. If we are always fixed on our earthly misery, the stream will never flow free from the mud of fears, faint-heartedness, and cowardice. I would be looking to see if I'm being watched or not, whether it would be good for a person so miserable to engage in something as lofty as prayer, that someone like myself has no need of anything special. Souls think that all such fears stem from humility. These fears come from our not understanding ourselves completely. They distort self-knowledge. This lack of freedom from ourselves is what can be feared. So I say, daughters, let's set our eyes on Christ, our good, and on his saints. There we shall learn true humility. Even though this is the first dwelling place, it's very rich and so precious that if the soul slips away from the vermin within it, nothing will be left to do but advance. You should not think in terms of just a few rooms, but in terms of 1,000,000. For souls enter here in many ways. The devil must have in each room many legions of devils to fight off souls when they try to go from one room to another. He is not so successful with those who have advanced closer to where the king dwells. But in the first rooms, souls are still absorbed in worldly pleasures and vanities. These souls are easily conquered, though they may desire not to offend God and do perform good works. They must approach His Majesty often and take His Blessed Mother and saints as intercessors to fight for them. Truly, in all states, it's necessary that strength come to us from God. There is a great deal of harm done us by our failure to understand well humility and self-knowledge, which is the most important thing for us. Hardly any light from the king's royal chambers reaches the first dwelling places. They are not dark and black as with the soul in sin, but they are darkened so the soul cannot see the light. The darkness is caused by many bad things like snakes, worldly things, that enter with the soul and don't allow it to be aware of the light. The soul is involved in worldly things and absorbed with possessions, honor, and business affairs. Though it might want to see these things, do not allow it to, nor is it able to slip free from so many impediments. If this person is to enter the second dwelling places, he must strive to give up unnecessary things and business affairs in conformity with his state in life, as it is so important to reach the main dwelling place. If he doesn't, it will be impossible for him to get there. It will be even impossible for him to stay where he is without danger. For in the midst of poisonous creatures, worldly things, one cannot help but be bitten at one time or another. Now then, what would happen, daughters, if we, who have entered much further into the castle to other secret dwelling places, should turn back? There are many persons to whom God has granted favors, who, through their own fault, have fallen back into this misery. So guard yourselves, my daughters, from extraneous cares. Remember that there are few dwelling places in this castle in which the devils do not wage battle. True, in some rooms, the guards, the faculties of the soul, the will, the intellect, and the memory, have strength to fight, But it is necessary that we don't grow careless in recognizing the wiles of the devil, who can deceive us by changing himself into an angel of light. We need to recognize him at the outset. For example, he gives a sister impulses towards penance. But if the prioress has ordered that no penance be done without permission, and the devil makes the sister think that in a good practice she can be daring, and so secretly gives herself up to a penitential life, and as a result, she ends up losing her health. What the devil is aiming at is no small thing: the cooling of the love and charity the sisters have for one another. Let us understand, my daughters, that true perfection consists in love of God and neighbor. The more perfectly we keep these two commandments, the more perfect we will become. Our rule and constitutions serve for nothing else than to be a means towards keeping these commandments with greater perfection. Mutual love is so important that I would never want it to be forgotten. The soul could lose its peace and even disturb the peace of others by looking at trifling things in people. If things are not done against the rule and are done against the rule and constitution, the prioress should be cautioned, and if she doesn't amend, the superior informed. This is charity. We must not talk about these things to one another. The devil could get gossiping started. The matter should be discussed with the one who could benefit. In this house, there's not much occasion for gossip, since continual silence is kept. But it is always good to be on guard. Amen.